The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Elena Vasquez pushed her worn cleaning cart down the marble corridors of Pinnacle Financial Tower. At 43 floors high, the gleaming skyscraper housed some of the most powerful executives in Chicago. And tonight, like every other night for the past 4 years, Elena would make sure every surface sparkled for their morning arrival. Her soft-soled shoes barely made a sound against the polished floor as she moved through the executive level, invisible to a world that never looked her way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had arrived at Pinnacle Financial at exactly 9:30 that evening, just as she had every weeknight since 2019. The security guard, Marcus, barely glanced up from his newspaper as she badged in through the employee entrance. She changed into her navy blue uniform in the cramped janitorial closet, pinned her graying hair into a neat bun, and began her systematic journey through the 43 floors of corporate ambition. The building told stories through its architecture. The lower floors housed cubicle farms where junior analysts worked late into the night, their desks cluttered with coffee cups and financial reports. The middle floors contained conference rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, where mid-level managers conducted their daily meetings. But it was the top 3 floors that truly captured Elena's attention, where the senior executives maintained offices larger than most people's homes. Elena had grown accustomed to the rhythm of corporate life. She knew which executives stayed late, which ones left remnants of expensive takeout dinners on their desks, and which ones treated their offices like personal museums filled with awards and photographs of themselves shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. She also knew that to them she was part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible as the air conditioning system or the elevator mechanisms. What none of them knew was that Elena carried a secret that would have shocked them into silence. Every night, after completing her rounds on the lower floors, she saved the executive conference room on the 42nd floor for last. This room, known as the Aurora Conference Center, served as the crown jewel of Pinnacle Financial. With its panoramic views of Chicago's skyline and its carefully curated collection of modern art, it was where the company held its most important meetings with potential investors and high-profile clients. At the center of this impressive space sat a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, its ebony surface reflecting the city lights below. According to the brass plaque beside it, the piano had been donated by the company's founder, Theodore Pinnacle, who believed that music elevated the human spirit and enhanced creative thinking. The reality was that the piano served primarily as an expensive conversation piece, occasionally played by hired musicians during corporate events. Elena approached the piano with the same reverence others might reserve for a religious shrine. She had been trained as a classical pianist at the prestigious Berkshire Conservatory of Music in Boston, where she had studied under world-renowned instructor Professor David Chen. Her talent had been discovered when she was 8 years old, growing up in a small apartment in East Los Angeles with her grandmother, Rosa, who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Rosa had noticed Elena's fascination with music during a rare visit to a shopping mall, where a pianist was performing holiday songs on a baby grand piano in the center court. While other children ran around the fountain or pressed their faces against toy store windows, Elena stood mesmerized by the way the pianist's fingers danced across the keys, creating melodies that seemed to float through the air like magic. That Christmas, Rosa spent her entire savings on a used upright piano she found in a classified ad. The instrument was missing several keys and desperately needed tuning, but to 8-year-old Elena, it represented infinite possibilities. She taught herself to play by listening to classical music on the radio and attempting to recreate the melodies by ear. Her natural ability was so remarkable that within 6 months she was playing complex pieces that most students took years to master. A music teacher at Elena's elementary school noticed her exceptional talent and connected her with a scholarship program that provided free lessons to underprivileged children. By the time Elena turned 15, she had won several regional competitions and caught the attention of talent scouts from major conservatories across the country. The full scholarship to Berkshire Conservatory seemed like a dream come true, promising to transform Elena from a poor girl from East LA into a professional concert pianist. Elena thrived at Berkshire, where she studied piano performance and music theory, while immersing herself in the works of Bach, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and contemporary composers who pushed the boundaries of classical music. Her professors predicted a brilliant career ahead, with opportunities to perform with major symphonies and record classical albums that would establish her as one of the leading pianists of her generation. But life had different plans for Elena. During her senior year at Berkshire, Rosa suffered a massive stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to work. Elena faced an impossible choice: complete her education and pursue her musical dreams, or return home to care for the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. The decision was never really in doubt. Elena withdrew from Berkshire just 3 months before graduation and returned to Los Angeles to become Rosa's full-time caregiver. She found work as a waitress at a diner near their apartment, using her earnings to pay for Rosa's medical treatments and physical therapy. During this period, Elena met David, a construction worker who was kind and hard-working but had no understanding of Elena's musical background. When Elena discovered she was pregnant with David's child, he disappeared without explanation, leaving her to face single motherhood while caring for her ailing grandmother. Rosa passed away when Elena's daughter, Sophia, was just 2 years old, leaving Elena to navigate life as a young single mother with no family support and limited financial resources. Elena worked a series of jobs over the years, from restaurant server to retail associate to office receptionist, always prioritizing stability and healthcare benefits over personal fulfillment. When Sophia was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes at age 7, Elena's focus shifted entirely to managing her daughter's medical needs and ensuring she had access to the best possible care. The job at Pinnacle Financial had come at a crucial time. Sophia was 14 and needed expensive insulin and continuous glucose monitoring equipment that Elena's previous employer's insurance plan didn't fully cover. The custodial position at Pinnacle offered excellent health benefits and paid significantly more than her previous jobs, though it required working nights and weekends. Elena had been cleaning office buildings for over a decade, but Pinnacle Financial was different. The building's sophisticated security system, high-end fixtures, and the constant presence of wealth and power created an atmosphere unlike anywhere she had worked before. More importantly, it housed the Aurora Conference Center and its magnificent Steinway piano. Elena's first encounter with the piano had been accidental. She was cleaning the conference room during her second week on the job when she noticed the instrument's pristine condition and perfect tuning. Unable to resist, she had gently pressed one key, producing a pure, resonant note that filled the spacious room with extraordinary clarity. The sound transported her instantly back to her days at Berkshire, when music had been the center of her universe rather than a distant memory. That night began Elena's secret ritual. After completing her cleaning duties throughout the building, she would return to the Aurora Conference Center and spend a few precious minutes with the piano. She never played loudly enough to trigger the building's sound detection systems, and she was always careful to ensure that her activities couldn't be observed by security cameras or heard by the overnight security staff. During these stolen moments, Elena would run her fingers across the keys and play softly, remembering pieces she had learned decades earlier. Her muscle memory remained surprisingly intact, and gradually, she began playing more complex compositions. The piano became her sanctuary, a place where she could reconnect with the person she had been before life demanded so many sacrifices. Elena's apartment in Pilsen was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a building that had seen better days. She and Sophia had lived there for 8 years, and while it wasn't luxurious, it provided them with stability and kept Sophia in the same school district throughout her adolescence. Sophia was now 17, a senior in high school with plans to study biochemistry in college. She was brilliant, motivated, and completely unaware of her mother's musical background. Elena had made a conscious decision never to tell Sophia about her time at Berkshire or her abandoned dreams of becoming a professional pianist. She didn't want Sophia to feel guilty about the sacrifices Elena had made, and she worried that revealing her past might make Sophia feel pressured to achieve extraordinary things to justify those sacrifices. Instead, Elena supported Sophia's academic pursuits and celebrated her achievements without mentioning her own unfulfilled aspirations. Sophia knew her mother worked nights cleaning offices, and she assumed Elena had always been in service industry jobs. Elena encouraged this assumption, believing it was better for Sophia to focus on her own future rather than dwelling on what might have been for her mother. The two had a close relationship built on mutual respect and shared determination to create better circumstances for their family. Elena's typical evening began at 8 o'clock when she helped Sophia with her insulin injection and evening snack before leaving for work. Sophia was responsible and mature enough to manage her diabetes care independently, but Elena never left without ensuring her daughter was stable and had everything needed for the night. Sophia usually spent her evenings studying or video chatting with friends, activities that kept her safely occupied while Elena worked. The commute from Pilsen to downtown Chicago took Elena 45 minutes on public transportation. She used this time to decompress from her day and mentally prepare for the hours of physical labor ahead. Elena found a strange peace in the repetitive nature of cleaning work.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
There was satisfaction in transforming cluttered, dirty spaces into pristine environments, and the solitude gave her time to think and plan. Elena's cleaning routine was methodical and efficient. She started on the lower floors and worked her way up, tackling restrooms, emptying trash bins, vacuuming carpets, and wiping down surfaces. The work was physically demanding, particularly for someone approaching her mid-40s, but Elena had developed systems and techniques that minimized strain while maximizing effectiveness. The executives' offices required special attention and discretion. Elena was trained to clean around personal items without disturbing them, to empty waste baskets without examining their contents, and to maintain absolute confidentiality about anything she might observe during her work. She had signed multiple non-disclosure agreements and undergone extensive background checks before being permitted access to the building's most sensitive areas. Elena genuinely enjoyed her co-workers in the custodial department. There was Carmen, a grandmother from Guatemala, who sent money home to support her extended family. Marcus, the security guard who was studying for his paralegal certification. And Robert, a retired teacher who took the cleaning job to supplement his pension. They formed a tight-knit community of hard-working people who looked out for one another and shared stories during their brief breaks. None of her co-workers knew about Elena's musical background, just as none of the executives knew she existed as anything more than an anonymous service provider. Elena had become expert at compartmentalizing different aspects of her life, keeping her past separate from her present and her professional identity separate from her personal dreams. The executive floors of Pinnacle Financial showcased a level of wealth and privilege that never failed to amaze Elena. The offices featured custom furniture, original artwork, and technology that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She cleaned around million-dollar deals documented in contracts left on desks, listened to voicemails about private jet schedules and vacation homes, and observed the remnants of business meals that cost more than Elena earned in a week. Elena found these glimpses into extreme wealth fascinating rather than resentating. She understood that these executives worked long hours and faced enormous pressure to generate profits for their clients and shareholders. Their success enabled them to employ people like Elena and contribute to the city's economy. She harbored no illusions about the fairness of economic inequality, but she also didn't waste energy resenting circumstances beyond her control. What Elena did resent was the way many executives treated service workers as invisible. She had observed countless instances of executives walking past janitors and security guards without acknowledgement, speaking about sensitive topics as if the cleaning staff couldn't hear or understand, and leaving messes that showed complete disregard for the people who would have to clean them up. The worst offender was Richard Blackwood, the chief executive officer of Pinnacle Financial. Blackwood was a man in his early 50s who had built his reputation on aggressive acquisition strategies and cost-cutting measures that maximized short-term profits, while often devastating the companies he acquired. He was known for his expensive suits, his collection of vintage watches, and his habit of treating employees as disposable resources. Elena had observed Blackwood's behavior during her 4 years at Pinnacle Financial. He was the type of person who interrupted conversations to take phone calls, who left conference rooms cluttered with papers and half-eaten meals, and who spoke dismissively about employees in departments he considered unimportant. She had seen him fire people via email and heard him make crude jokes about competitors and colleagues. Blackwood's office occupied a corner of the 43rd floor, with windows on 2 sides offering spectacular views of Chicago and Lake Michigan. His desk was a massive piece of polished mahogany that cost more than most cars, and his walls were decorated with photographs of himself with various politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. Elena cleaned his office 3 times a week and had learned to work around his unpredictable schedule and demanding personality. Despite her distaste for Blackwood's character, Elena maintained her professionalism and completed her work with the same attention to detail she brought to every other area of the building. She understood that personal feelings couldn't interfere with job performance, particularly when Sophia's healthcare and their family's financial stability depended on Elena's continued employment. Elena's relationship with the Steinway piano had evolved over her years at Pinnacle Financial. What began as brief furtive encounters had grown into a cherished routine that sustained her through difficult periods. She had gradually overcome her fear of being discovered and allowed herself to play more expressively, though always quietly enough to avoid detection. The piano had become Elena's closest confidant, the only witness to her hidden talent and suppressed dreams. During particularly stressful periods when Sophia's medical bills were overwhelming, or when Elena felt discouraged about their circumstances, she would sit at the piano and play pieces that reminded her of better times. The music provided emotional release and helped her maintain hope for a better future. Elena had been careful to research the building's security protocols and cleaning schedules to ensure her piano sessions couldn't be observed or recorded. She knew which cameras covered the Aurora Conference Center and how to position herself outside their range. She understood the overnight security guard's patrol routine and timed her visits to the piano accordingly. Most importantly, she had learned to play softly enough that the sound wouldn't travel beyond the conference room. The pieces Elena played ranged from classical compositions she had learned at Berkshire to contemporary songs she had taught herself by ear. She was particularly drawn to Chopin's nocturnes, which seemed perfectly suited to her nighttime performances, and to Bach's inventions, which challenged her technical skills while providing intellectual stimulation. Occasionally she would improvise, creating original melodies that expressed her current emotional state. Elena's technical abilities had remained remarkably sharp despite years away from regular practice. Her fingers retained their strength and agility, her musical memory remained intact, and her interpretive skills had actually deepened with life experience. She often wondered what her former professors would think if they could see her now, finding beauty and meaning in stolen moments with a piano in an empty office building. The irony of Elena's situation was not lost on her. She worked in a building filled with people who could afford to support musical arts and education, yet none of them knew that one of the most talented musicians in the city was cleaning their offices every night. She often fantasized about what would happen if her secret were revealed, imagining scenarios where her talent was recognized and opportunities emerged. But Elena was also realistic about her circumstances. At 43 years old with a teenage daughter to support, she couldn't afford to take risks that might jeopardize their stability. Sophia's college education and medical needs took priority over Elena's personal dreams, just as Rosa's care had taken priority over Elena's conservatory graduation decades earlier. Elena found meaning in her sacrifice by viewing it as an investment in Sophia's future. If Sophia could complete her education and establish a successful career in biochemistry, she would have opportunities that had been denied to Elena. The family's economic circumstances would improve, and perhaps Elena could eventually return to music in some capacity. Sophia was unaware of the depth of her mother's sacrifice, but she was grateful for Elena's support and determined to make the most of her opportunities. She maintained excellent grades while managing her diabetes, participated in science competitions, and had already been accepted to several universities with substantial scholarship offers. Elena was enormously proud of Sophia's achievements and felt that her own abandoned dreams had been worthwhile if they enabled Sophia's success. The relationship between Elena and Sophia was built on trust, communication, and shared values. They discussed Sophia's academic progress, her career goals, and her social relationships openly and honestly. Elena provided guidance without being controlling, and Sophia respected her mother's wisdom while maintaining her independence. Neither of them discussed Elena's past or the dreams she had given up, but both understood that their family's strength came from their commitment to each other. Elena's support network extended beyond her relationship with Sophia. She maintained friendships with former co-workers from previous jobs, stayed in touch with a few families from Sophia's elementary school, and participated in a community organization that helped families navigate the healthcare system for children with chronic conditions. These relationships provided emotional support and practical assistance during difficult times. Elena also found community among her co-workers at Pinnacle Financial, particularly Carmen, who had become like a sister to her. Carmen understood the challenges of single motherhood and the immigrant experience, and she provided both practical advice and emotional support when Elena needed it. Their friendship was one of the unexpected benefits of Elena's job at Pinnacle Financial. The work environment at Pinnacle Financial was generally positive for custodial staff, despite the challenging nature of the work itself. The building management company that employed Elena provided decent wages, good benefits, and opportunities for advancement within the organization. Elena had been promoted twice since starting at Pinnacle Financial, each time receiving salary increases that helped her keep pace with Sophia's growing expenses. Elena's supervisor, Patricia, was a fair and supportive manager who recognized Elena's reliability and attention to detail. Patricia had consistently given Elena positive performance reviews and had recommended her for additional training opportunities that could lead to supervisory roles. Elena appreciated Patricia's support, but wasn't sure she wanted the additional responsibility that would come with management positions. The custodial staff at Pinnacle Financial worked as a team, with each person responsible for specific floors or areas of the building. Elena's assignment included the executive floors, which was considered a desirable posting because it paid slightly more and offered more regular hours than some other areas.
Elena had earned this assignment through her consistent performance and professional demeanor. Elena's work ethic was driven by her understanding that her job performance directly impacted her family's financial security and Sophia's future opportunities. She took pride in her work and maintained high standards even when no one was watching. This integrity extended to all aspects of her life and was one of the values she had tried to instill in Sophia. The building's overnight atmosphere was peaceful and contemplative, providing Elena with time to think and reflect while she worked. She often used this solitude to plan Sophia's college applications, research scholarship opportunities, and consider their family's long-term goals. The physical nature of the work was actually beneficial for Elena's mental health, providing exercise and helping her process stress through movement. Elena's musical sessions with the Steinway piano had become increasingly important to her emotional well-being. These moments provided a connection to her authentic self and reminded her that her identity extended beyond her role as a single mother and service worker. The music helped her maintain hope and perspective during difficult periods. As Elena approached her 5th year at Pinnacle Financial, she felt a sense of stability and cautious optimism about the future. Sophia was thriving academically and personally. Their financial situation was more secure than it had been in years, and Elena had found a routine that worked for their family. The piano sessions continued to provide joy and fulfillment, and Elena had begun to imagine what her life might look like once Sophia completed college and became more independent. Elena never could have predicted that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down by a single evening that would change everything she thought she knew about her future. The night that would transform her life began like any other, with Elena arriving at Pinnacle Financial for what she expected to be a routine shift of cleaning and solitude. But tonight Pinnacle Financial was hosting its annual Investor Gala, a lavish event designed to showcase the company's success and attract new clients. Elena had known about the event but hadn't expected it to affect her work schedule, since the party was being held in the building's ground floor atrium and she typically worked on the upper floors. What Elena didn't know was that Richard Blackwood had decided to extend the party to include tours of the executive floors, specifically to show off the Aurora Conference Center and its impressive Steinway piano. As Elena pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator that would take her to her usual starting point, she had no idea that her world was about to collide with Blackwood's in a way that would expose her deepest secret and change both of their lives forever. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, revealing sounds that Elena had never heard in the building after hours. Voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses echoed from the direction of the Aurora Conference Center. Elena hesitated, her hand gripping the handle of her cleaning cart as she processed this unexpected development. The Investor Gala was supposed to be contained to the ground floor, but clearly the evening's events had expanded beyond their original boundaries. Elena checked her watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock, well past the time when the building should have been empty except for security and custodial staff. She considered skipping the executive floors entirely and returning later, but her supervisor Patricia had been clear that all areas needed to be cleaned according to schedule, regardless of special events. Elena took a deep breath and pushed her cart forward, hoping to complete her work quickly and quietly without disturbing whatever was happening in the conference center. As she approached the Aurora Conference Center, Elena could see through the glass walls that the room was filled with approximately 30 people dressed in expensive evening wear. The men wore tailored tuxedos and the women glittered in designer gowns that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary. They stood in small groups, champagne glasses in hand, engaged in animated conversations while admiring the room's panoramic views of Chicago's illuminated skyline. Elena recognized several faces from the photographs that decorated the executive offices throughout the building. There was Margaret Whitfield, the company's chief financial officer, known for her sharp wit and sharper business acumen. Standing near the windows was Jonathan Crawford, the head of the investment division, whose aggressive trading strategies had made him both wealthy and controversial. At the center of the largest group stood Richard Blackwood himself, gesturing expansively as he regaled his guests with what appeared to be an entertaining story. Elena decided to clean the adjacent offices first, hoping the party would conclude before she needed to access the conference center. She moved methodically through the executive suites, emptying waste baskets and wiping down surfaces while keeping one ear tuned to the sounds from the party. The conversations seemed to be growing louder and more animated, suggesting that the alcohol was flowing freely and the guests were becoming increasingly uninhibited. As Elena worked, she couldn't help but overhear fragments of conversation that drifted from the conference center. The guests were discussing business deals worth millions of dollars, vacation plans to exotic destinations, and social events that existed in a world completely removed from Elena's daily reality. She heard names dropped casually that she recognized from newspaper headlines and magazine covers, references to private jets and yacht clubs and charitable galas that served as networking opportunities for the wealthy. Elena found herself both fascinated and disturbed by these glimpses into extreme privilege. These people wielded enormous influence over the economy and society, making decisions that affected thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in investments. Yet their casual conversations revealed a disconnect from the real-world consequences of their actions, a sense of entitlement that seemed to insulate them from the struggles faced by ordinary working people. After completing her work in the surrounding offices, Elena approached the conference center with growing apprehension. The party showed no signs of winding down, and she needed to clean the room as part of her regular duties. She knocked gently on the glass door and waited for someone to notice her presence. Richard Blackwood was the first to spot Elena standing outside the conference center with her cleaning cart. His face registered momentary annoyance at the interruption, followed by what appeared to be amusement as he processed the situation. Elena watched as Blackwood excused himself from his conversation and walked toward the door, his steps slightly unsteady from the evening's champagne consumption. Blackwood opened the door with an exaggerated flourish, his voice carrying across the conference center as he addressed Elena. "Well, well, what do we have here? Our dedicated cleaning staff, working diligently to keep our offices pristine." His tone was condescending, treating Elena's presence as an opportunity for entertainment rather than a routine business interaction. Elena kept her eyes downcast and spoke in a quiet, professional tone. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Blackwood. I can return later to clean this room if that would be more convenient." She had learned over the years that deference and invisibility were her best strategies for navigating interactions with difficult executives. But Blackwood was clearly in a mood to make Elena's presence part of the evening's entertainment. He turned back toward his guests, his voice projected to ensure everyone could hear his remarks. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet one of our building's most dedicated employees. This is..." He paused dramatically, realizing he didn't know Elena's name despite her 4 years of service in the building. "Elena Vasquez, sir," Elena supplied quietly, hoping to satisfy his curiosity and be allowed to leave. "Elena Vasquez," Blackwood repeated, savoring each syllable as if he were tasting an expensive wine. "Elena has been keeping our offices spotless for years now, haven't you, Elena? Always here late at night, making sure everything is perfect for our arrival each morning." The guests had turned their attention toward the interaction, some appearing genuinely interested, while others seemed uncomfortable with Blackwood's obvious intention to make Elena the focus of unwanted attention. Elena felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment as 30 pairs of eyes examined her as if she were an exhibit in a museum. Margaret Whitfield stepped forward with what appeared to be an attempt to redirect the conversation. "Richard, perhaps we should let Elena complete her work so she can get home to her family." Her tone suggested disapproval of Blackwood's behavior, but she spoke quietly enough to avoid creating a direct confrontation. Blackwood ignored Margaret's suggestion and moved closer to Elena, his champagne-influenced confidence growing with the attention from his audience. "Actually, Margaret, I think our guests might enjoy getting to know Elena better. After all, we're always talking about the importance of appreciating all our employees, aren't we?" Elena felt trapped between her professional obligation to be respectful to executives and her growing discomfort with the direction of the conversation. She gripped the handle of her cleaning cart more tightly and attempted to maintain her composure while searching for an appropriate way to extricate herself from the situation. "I really should continue with my work, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have several more floors to complete before my shift ends." But Blackwood was enjoying himself too much to let Elena escape so easily. He gestured grandly toward the Steinway piano that dominated one corner of the conference center, its polished surface reflecting the room's elegant lighting. "You know, Elena,
I've always wondered about this beautiful instrument. It's been sitting here for years, mostly serving as an expensive decoration. I bet most of our guests tonight have never heard it played." Elena's heart began racing as she realized where Blackwood's alcohol-fueled logic was leading. She had spent countless hours with that piano, developing an intimate relationship with its touch and tone, but she could never reveal that connection without exposing her secret and potentially jeopardizing her employment. "I'm sure it's a lovely instrument, sir," Elena replied carefully, hoping to deflect Blackwood's attention away from both herself and the piano. Blackwood's grin widened as an idea formed in his champagne-clouded mind. "Elena, I have a wonderful suggestion. Why don't you play something for our guests? I'm sure you must have some musical ability. Everyone can play a little something, can't they?" The conference center fell silent as the guests processed Blackwood's suggestion. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the impossible position she was being placed in. If she admitted to her musical ability, she would have to explain how and where she had acquired such skills, potentially revealing her secret nighttime sessions with the company's piano. If she denied any musical knowledge, she would be forced to embarrass herself in front of 30 wealthy strangers who would judge her based on Blackwood's cruel entertainment. "I don't really play piano, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. "I wouldn't want to damage such an expensive instrument." Blackwood laughed loudly at Elena's response, his amusement echoing off the conference center's high ceilings. "Damage it? Elena, it's a piano, not a Ming vase. You can't hurt it by pressing a few keys. Come on, don't be modest. I insist that you play something for us." Several guests shifted uncomfortably as they witnessed Blackwood's increasingly aggressive insistence. Jonathan Crawford cleared his throat and attempted to intervene diplomatically. "Richard, perhaps we should return to discussing the quarterly projections. I'm sure Elena has important work to complete." But Blackwood was beyond the reach of subtle social cues, his judgment impaired by alcohol and his ego inflated by the attention he was receiving. He moved toward Elena and placed what he probably intended as a friendly hand on her shoulder, though Elena experienced it as a threatening gesture that made her feel even more trapped. "Nonsense, Jonathan. This will only take a moment, and it will be educational for all of us. We spend so much time in our corporate bubble that we rarely get to see how the other half lives. Elena here represents the backbone of American working people, and I think we should celebrate that by having her share her talents with us." Elena recognized that Blackwood's words were carefully chosen to sound magnanimous while actually being deeply condescending. He was framing his demand as an opportunity for Elena, rather than an exercise in humiliation, but his true intentions were transparent to everyone in the room. Some guests looked away in embarrassment, while others watched with the fascination of spectators at a traffic accident. "Please, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, her professional facade beginning to crack under the pressure. "I really don't know how to play. I would only embarrass myself and disturb your party." Blackwood's expression shifted from amusement to something approaching irritation as Elena continued to resist his suggestion. His alcohol-influenced personality was becoming more aggressive, and Elena realized that her refusal was only encouraging him to escalate the situation. "Elena, I'm not asking you to perform a concert. I'm simply suggesting that you sit at the piano and play a simple song. Mary Had a Little Lamb, perhaps, or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Surely someone of your background can manage something that elementary." The condescension in Blackwood's voice was now unmistakable, and Elena felt a flush of anger rise alongside her embarrassment and fear. His reference to someone of your background revealed his true attitudes toward working-class people, and his assumption that she would only be capable of children's songs demonstrated his complete ignorance of her actual abilities. Elena looked around the room at the faces watching her predicament. Some guests appeared genuinely uncomfortable with Blackwood's behavior, but none seemed willing to challenge him directly or create a scene that might affect their business relationships. She realized that she was entirely alone in this situation, with no allies among the wealthy spectators who viewed her discomfort as entertainment.
Margaret Whitfield made another attempt to redirect the conversation, her voice carrying a note of authority that reflected her senior position within the company. "Richard, I think we've all had enough excitement for one evening. Perhaps we should allow Elena to complete her work while we return to the reception downstairs." Blackwood turned toward Margaret with an expression that suggested he viewed her intervention as a challenge to his authority rather than a reasonable suggestion. Elena could see that the alcohol had amplified his natural arrogance and made him resistant to any attempts to moderate his behavior. "Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I think our guests are enjoying this little diversion. Aren't you curious to hear what Elena can do?" "I know I am." Blackwood's tone carried a subtle threat that made it clear he would not tolerate further interference from his colleagues. Elena realized that the situation was spiraling beyond her control and that her options were becoming increasingly limited. She could continue to refuse Blackwood's demand and risk escalating his anger, potentially jeopardizing her employment and Sophia's healthcare coverage. Alternatively, she could acquiesce to his request and attempt to play badly enough to satisfy his expectations while protecting her secret. As Elena wrestled with this impossible choice, she thought about Sophia at home, probably finishing her evening insulin injection and preparing for bed. Sophia trusted Elena to maintain their stable life and secure future, and Elena couldn't afford to make decisions based on pride or principle if they threatened that stability. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said quietly, "if you really insist, I suppose I could try to play something very simple. But I want to emphasize that I have no musical training, and I'm likely to make mistakes." Blackwood's face lit up with triumph as Elena capitulated to his demand. He gestured grandly toward the piano, as if he were presenting her with a magnificent gift rather than forcing her into an uncomfortable performance. "Excellent, Elena. I knew you had it in you. Ladies and gentlemen, please gather around for our impromptu concert." The guests reluctantly moved closer to the piano, forming a semicircle around the instrument, while maintaining expressions that ranged from curious anticipation to visible discomfort. Elena walked slowly toward the Steinway, her legs feeling unsteady as she approached the instrument that had been her secret sanctuary for 4 years. Elena sat down on the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them above the familiar keys. The Steinway felt different with an audience watching her every movement, its potential for beauty overshadowed by the humiliation of the circumstances. She could feel 30 pairs of eyes examining her, waiting for the entertainment that Blackwood had promised them. Elena's mind raced as she tried to decide what to play. She needed to choose something simple enough to match her claimed lack of ability, but she also needed to avoid embarrassing herself so completely that it might affect her employment. She settled on a basic version of Fur Elise, a piece that most people would recognize, but that she could play in a simplified arrangement that wouldn't reveal her true capabilities. Elena pressed the first notes of Beethoven's familiar melody, intentionally playing with less precision and expression than she was capable of. The notes sounded tentative and uncertain, exactly what an amateur might produce when forced to perform beyond their comfort level. She could hear some of the guests chuckling softly at her apparent nervousness and limited technique. But as Elena continued playing, something unexpected began to happen. Despite her efforts to disguise her abilities, her natural musicality started to emerge. Her fingers found their way to more complex passages, her touch became more confident, and the melody began to flow with the grace and beauty that had characterized her playing at Berkshire Conservatory decades earlier. Elena realized what was happening and tried to pull back, to return to the amateur performance she had intended to give. But the music had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long, and her hands seemed to have a will of their own. The simplified arrangement of Fur Elise gradually transformed into something closer to Beethoven's original composition, with all its intricate voicing and emotional depth. The chuckling from the audience stopped abruptly as the guests recognized that what they were hearing was not the fumbling of an untrained cleaner, but the performance of someone with genuine musical skill. Elena could feel the energy in the room shifting from amused condescension to surprised attention, but she found herself unable to stop playing or to return to the deliberately poor performance she had planned. The music poured out of Elena as if a dam had burst, releasing years of suppressed artistry and emotion. She forgot about Blackwood and his cruel intentions, forgot about the watching audience and her fear of discovery. For those few minutes she was no longer Elena the night cleaner, but Elena the musician, expressing through Beethoven's notes all the beauty and pain and hope that she had carried within her for 25 years. When Elena finally reached the end of the piece, the conference center was completely silent. No one moved or spoke, or even seemed to breathe as the last notes faded into the Chicago night. Elena sat motionless at the piano bench, her hands still poised above the keys, as she processed what had just happened and began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Slowly, Elena turned to face the audience that had witnessed her transformation from invisible service worker to accomplished musician. The faces looking back at her showed a range of emotions from amazement to confusion to something approaching awe. Richard Blackwood stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as he struggled to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Margaret Whitfield was the first to break the silence, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the hushed room. "Elena, that was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Elena felt panic rising in her chest as she realized that her carefully constructed secret had been exposed in the most public way possible. 30 of Chicago's most powerful business leaders had just witnessed her to demonstrate abilities that contradicted everything they thought they knew about her background and identity. "I took some lessons when I was younger," Elena stammered, attempting to minimize the revelation while knowing that her performance had made such explanations inadequate. "It was a long time ago." Jonathan Crawford stepped closer to the piano, his expression showing genuine curiosity rather than the condescending amusement that had characterized the evening's earlier interactions. "Elena, what you just played requires years of serious study. That wasn't the result of a few childhood lessons." Elena stood up from the piano bench, her legs still unsteady, as she faced the impossible task of explaining her performance without revealing the full truth about her background. She could see that the guests were no longer viewing her as entertainment, but as a mystery that demanded explanation. Blackwood had recovered from his initial shock and was beginning to process the implications of what had just occurred. His plan to humiliate Elena had backfired spectacularly, revealing his own ignorance and cruel intentions while exposing Elena's hidden talents. He looked around at his guests, many of whom were now regarding him with expressions that ranged from disapproval to disgust. "Well," Blackwood said, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized his earlier pronouncements, "that was certainly unexpected. Elena, you've been hiding quite a talent from us." Elena could hear the underlying threat in Blackwood's words, the suggestion that her deception about her abilities might have consequences for her employment. She realized that she needed to find a way to explain her performance without revealing the extent of her musical background or her secret relationship with the company's piano. "Mr. Blackwood, I apologize if I misled you about my abilities," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "I studied piano seriously when I was young, but that was many years ago. I haven't played regularly since then, and I certainly never expected to perform for anyone." Margaret Whitfield moved closer to Elena, her expression showing what appeared to be genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. "Elena, what level of study are we talking about? Because what we just heard suggests conservatory-level training." Elena felt trapped between her need to minimize her background and the impossibility of explaining her performance without acknowledging significant musical education. She could see that several guests were recording the conversation on their phones, potentially creating permanent documentation of whatever explanation she provided. "I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to study music when I was younger," Elena said carefully. "But circumstances changed, and I had to leave school to take care of my family. I've been working in service jobs ever since." The simple honesty of Elena's explanation seemed to resonate with several guests, who nodded with understanding. Elena could see recognition in their faces as they processed her story and began to understand the sacrifices that had led her from musical promise to night cleaning. An older woman whom Elena didn't recognize stepped forward, her expression showing what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Elena, may I ask which conservatory you attended? I sit on the board of several music schools, and I'm curious about your background." Elena felt her carefully constructed explanation beginning to unravel as the guests' questions became more specific and potentially verifiable. She realized that any details she provided could be investigated, potentially exposing not only her educational background, but also her secret piano sessions in the Aurora Conference Center. "It was a school in Boston," Elena said vaguely, hoping to satisfy the woman's curiosity without providing information that could be easily researched. "But that was a very long time ago, and I'm sure my former professors wouldn't even remember me." The woman's expression suggested that Elena's evasive answer had only increased her curiosity, but before she could ask follow-up questions, Blackwood intervened with what appeared to be an attempt to regain control of the situation. "Well, Elena, this has certainly been an educational evening for all of us," Blackwood said, his tone carrying a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask his underlying discomfort. "I think we've all learned that we shouldn't make assumptions about people based on their current circumstances." Elena could hear the subtext in Blackwood's words, the suggestion that her revelation had been embarrassing for him and potentially problematic for their professional relationship. She understood that she needed to find a way to minimize the situation and return to her previous invisibility as quickly as possible. "I should really finish my cleaning duties, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, moving toward her cart in an attempt to end the encounter. "I apologize again for the interruption, and I hope you and your guests enjoy the rest of your evening." But the guests were not ready to let Elena disappear back into anonymity. Several of them approached her with business cards and expressions of genuine interest in her story and her musical abilities. Elena found herself surrounded by people who wanted to know more about her background, her current circumstances, and her future plans. A distinguished man in his 60s introduced himself as David Chen, and Elena felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the surname of her former professor at Berkshire Conservatory. When he mentioned that he was a retired music educator who had taught at several prestigious institutions, Elena realized that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed completely. "Elena, I taught at Berkshire Conservatory for many years," Professor Chen said, his eyes studying her face with growing recognition. "I remember a student named Elena Vasquez who had extraordinary talent. She left suddenly during her senior year, and we never knew what happened to her." Elena felt the room spinning as her past and present collided in the most public way possible. The man standing before her was not just any music educator, but the professor who had guided her development during her time at Berkshire, who had predicted a brilliant future for her that had never materialized. "Professor Chen," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible as she processed the impossible coincidence of their reunion. "I didn't expect to see you here." Professor Chen's expression shifted from curiosity to amazement as he confirmed Elena's identity. "Elena Vasquez, one of the most talented students I ever taught. We were all devastated when you left school so suddenly. What happened to you? How did you end up here?" Elena could feel 30 pairs of eyes watching her as her carefully constructed privacy crumbled around her. The story she had kept hidden for 25 years was about to be exposed in front of Chicago's business elite, and there was no way to prevent the revelation that would change everything about her life at Pinnacle Financial. As Elena struggled to find words to explain the path that had led her from conservatory promise to night cleaning, she realized that her world was about to change forever. The secret she had guarded so carefully was now public knowledge, and the consequences of that exposure were impossible to predict. The conference center remained silent as everyone waited for Elena's response to Professor Chen's questions. Elena looked around at the faces watching her, seeing a mixture of curiosity, sympathy and amazement that made her feel both exposed and somehow liberated. For the first time in 25 years she was being seen as the musician she had always been rather than just the service worker she had become. Elena took a deep breath and began to tell her story, knowing that there was no way back to the invisibility she had cherished, and that whatever happened next would be entirely different from the life she had carefully constructed for herself and Sophia. The revelation that would change everything had begun, and Elena could only hope that the consequences would be something she and her daughter could survive. Elena stood in the Aurora Conference Center, surrounded by 30 of Chicago's most influential business leaders, as Professor Chen waited for her response. The weight of 25 years of hidden truth pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She could feel her carefully constructed life beginning to unravel, thread by thread, in front of an audience that had the power to either destroy or transform her future. "Professor Chen," Elena began, her voice stronger than she felt, "you're right. I was your student at Berkshire Conservatory. I left during my senior year because my grandmother became ill and needed full-time care. There was no one else to help her, and I couldn't afford both tuition and her medical expenses." The conference room remained completely silent as Elena spoke, her words carrying the weight of years of suppressed emotion. She could see Professor Chen's expression shift from curiosity to understanding, and then to something that looked like profound sadness as he processed the implications of her explanation. "Elena, you were one of the most promising students I ever taught," Professor Chen said softly. "We held your spot for an entire year, hoping you would return. The faculty talked about establishing a scholarship fund specifically to help you complete your degree. What happened after you left?" Elena felt tears threatening to form in her eyes as she remembered those final days at Berkshire, when she had packed her few belongings and said goodbye to the life she had always imagined for herself. The memory of Professor Chen's disappointment and concern was still painful after all these years. "My grandmother passed away 6 months after I left school," Elena continued. "By then I was pregnant and working multiple jobs to support myself. College became impossible, and music seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. I've been working service jobs ever since, trying to provide stability for my daughter." Poured. Margaret Whitfield stepped closer to Elena, her expression showing genuine empathy rather than the polite interest that characterized most corporate interactions. "Elena, you've been cleaning our offices for years. Did you know that we sponsor several arts education programs in the city? We could have helped you return to music if we had known about your background." Elena looked around the room at the faces watching her, seeing a mixture of sympathy, amazement, and what appeared to be genuine concern for her circumstances. These people who had seemed so distant and privileged just minutes earlier were now seeing her as a person with a story rather than an invisible service provider. "I never told anyone about my musical background," Elena admitted. "I was afraid that people would think I was pretentious or that I was somehow above the work I was doing. I needed this job and I couldn't risk losing it by seeming like I didn't belong here." Richard Blackwood had remained silent throughout Elena's explanation, his earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort as he processed the implications of his behavior. The cruel joke he had intended to play had revealed not only Elena's extraordinary talent, but also his own ignorance and insensitivity. Several guests were now looking at him with expressions that ranged from disappointment to outright disgust. Jonathan Crawford addressed Elena directly, his tone respectful rather than condescending. "Elena, what you've just shared changes everything about how we should view not just you but all of our employees. How many other talented, educated people are working in positions that don't reflect their abilities because of circumstances beyond their control?" Elena realized that her revelation was prompting broader questions about economic inequality and social assumptions that made the wealthy guests uncomfortable. She could see them processing the implications of her story, wondering how many other invisible employees might have hidden talents and abandoned dreams. The older woman who had asked about Elena's conservatory training introduced herself as Victoria Ashworth, a prominent philanthropist who served on the boards of several cultural institutions. "Elena, I want you to know that what happened to you tonight was completely inappropriate. Mr. Blackwood's behavior was unacceptable regardless of the outcome." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward Victoria for acknowledging the humiliation she had experienced, even though it had ultimately led to positive revelations. She realized that she had found unexpected allies among Blackwood's guests, people who were appalled by his treatment of her and genuinely interested in helping her moving forward. Professor Chen moved closer to Elena, his expression showing the same intensity she remembered from their lessons decades earlier. "Elena, I need to ask you something important. Have you continued playing piano over the years? Because what we heard tonight wasn't the result of muscle memory alone."
That performance showed active musical development. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized that Professor Chen's question was leading toward her most closely guarded secret. She looked around the room, knowing that her answer would either complete her exposure or allow her to maintain some privacy about her nighttime piano sessions. "I play occasionally," Elena said carefully, hoping to satisfy Professor Chen's curiosity without revealing the full extent of her relationship with the Aurora Conference Center's piano. "When I can find access to an instrument." But Professor Chen's trained ear had detected something in Elena's performance that couldn't be explained by occasional practice. His expression showed the analytical intensity that had made him such an effective teacher, and Elena realized that he wasn't going to be satisfied with vague answers. "Elena, the interpretation you gave tonight was too sophisticated for someone who only plays occasionally. Your understanding of Beethoven's harmonic structure, your phrasing, your dynamic control, those skills require regular practice and ongoing musical engagement. Where have you been playing?" Elena felt trapped between her desire to maintain some privacy and the impossibility of deceiving someone with Professor Chen's expertise. She looked around the room at the expectant faces, realizing that her secret was about to be completely exposed. "I sometimes practice here," Elena admitted quietly, "after hours when the building is empty. I've always been careful not to disturb anyone or damage anything." The conference room erupted in surprised murmurs as the guests processed this revelation. Elena had been using the company's expensive piano for her own purposes, a breach of protocol that could potentially justify her immediate termination. She watched Blackwood's face, expecting to see anger or vindication, but instead finding confusion and something that might have been respect. Margaret Whitfield was the first to respond to Elena's admission, her voice carrying authority that silenced the murmuring guests. "Elena, are you telling us that you've been maintaining your musical skills by practicing on our Steinway after completing your cleaning duties?" Elena nodded, unable to speak as she waited for the consequences of her confession. She thought about Sophia at home, probably asleep by now, unaware that her mother's career and their family's stability were hanging in the balance in a corporate conference room 42 floors above the Chicago streets. Professor Chen's expression showed amazement rather than disapproval as he processed Elena's revelation. "Elena, that explains everything about your performance tonight. You've been quietly maintaining and developing your abilities while working a physically demanding job and raising a child alone. That's extraordinary dedication to your art." Victoria Ashworth stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "Mr. Blackwood, I think we need to discuss how Pinnacle Financial is going to address this situation. Elena has clearly been an exemplary employee who has gone above and beyond her duties while dealing with circumstances that would have broken most people." Elena could see that the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically from her initial humiliation to something approaching a business negotiation about her future. The guests were no longer viewing her as entertainment, but as a person whose story demanded action and possibly restitution. Blackwood finally found his voice, though he seemed uncertain about how to respond to the transformed situation. I think we all agree that tonight has been educational for everyone involved. Elena, I owe you an apology for putting you in an uncomfortable position. Elena could hear the calculated nature of Blackwood's apology, designed more to salvage his reputation with his guests than to address the genuine harm he had intended to cause. She realized that while her secret was now exposed, she had gained unexpected power in the situation through the sympathy and support of Blackwood's business associates. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, finding strength in the support around her, "I appreciate your apology. I hope this experience helps you understand that every employee deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position or background." Elena's response drew nods of approval from several guests, who seemed impressed by her grace under pressure and her ability to maintain professionalism despite Blackwood's behavior. She realized that she had handled the situation in a way that enhanced rather than diminished her standing with these influential people. Professor Chen addressed the room with the authority of an educator who had spent decades developing young talent. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed tonight is extremely rare. Elena represents the kind of artistic potential that our society often wastes through economic inequality and lack of opportunity. The question is what we're going to do about it." Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention and support, but also terrified about what changes might result from her exposure. She had spent years creating stability for Sophia, and any dramatic alterations to their circumstances could potentially disrupt her daughter's education and medical care. "Professor Chen, I appreciate your concern," Elena said, "but I need to be careful about any changes that might affect my daughter's welfare. She's a senior in high school with diabetes, and her health insurance and stability are my primary responsibilities." Victoria Ashworth smiled at Elena's response, her expression showing approval for Elena's priorities. "Elena, I think you'll find that sometimes dramatic changes can improve rather than threaten stability. What if we could find a way for you to use your musical talents while maintaining the security you need for your family?" Elena felt a flutter of hope mixed with apprehension as she considered Victoria's suggestion. She had dreamed for years about returning to music in some capacity, but had always dismissed such fantasies as unrealistic given her circumstances. Margaret Whitfield addressed the group with the efficiency that had made her successful in corporate finance. "I propose that we take time to develop a comprehensive plan for Elena's future that addresses both her artistic potential and her practical needs. This isn't something that should be decided impulsively." Elena felt grateful for Margaret's measured approach, recognizing that any sustainable changes to her life would require careful planning and consideration of multiple factors. She also appreciated that these influential people were taking her circumstances seriously rather than making grand gestures that might create more problems than solutions. Professor Chen turned to Elena with the same intense focus she remembered from their lessons years earlier. "Elena, I want to ask you directly, if circumstances were different, if you had the support and security you needed for your daughter, would you want to return to music professionally?" Elena felt her heart racing as she confronted a question she had avoided answering even to herself for 25 years. The dream of performing and teaching music had never completely died, but she had buried it so deeply that acknowledging it felt both liberating and terrifying. "Professor Chen, music has never stopped being part of who I am," Elena said slowly. "Even while working other jobs, I've continued to grow as a musician. If there were a way to return to music without jeopardizing Sophia's future, it would be a dream come true." Elena's honest answer seemed to galvanize the group, as if her admission had given them permission to begin planning concrete changes rather than simply expressing sympathy. She could see several guests exchanging glances and murmuring to each other, apparently discussing possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. Victoria Ashworth took charge of the developing situation with the confidence of someone accustomed to organizing complex philanthropic initiatives. "Elena, I want to propose something specific.
I chair the board of the Chicago Institute of Music, and we're always looking for exceptional faculty members who can bring real-world experience to their teaching. Elena felt her breath catch as she processed Victoria's suggestion. Teaching at a prestigious music institute would represent not just a return to music, but an opportunity to help other students avoid the circumstances that had derailed her own career. Mrs. Ashworth, that sounds wonderful, but I don't have my degree from Berkshire, Elena said, feeling obligated to point out the obvious obstacle to Victoria's suggestion. Most music institutes require completed formal education. Professor Chen laughed softly at Elena's concern, his expression showing the same amused confidence she remembered from their lessons. Elena, I think you'll find that exceptional talent and experience can sometimes substitute for conventional credentials.
Besides, there are ways to address the degree situation if you're genuinely interested in returning to academic music. Elena felt overwhelmed by the possibilities being discussed around her, but also terrified that she was allowing herself to hope for changes that might not materialize or might create unexpected problems for her family. Margaret Whitfield addressed the practical concerns that Elena was afraid to voice. Elena, any transition we discuss would need to include provisions for your daughter's healthcare and education, as well as income stability during the adjustment period. We're not talking about asking you to take risks with your family's security. Elena felt tears of gratitude forming in her eyes as she realized that these strangers were taking her responsibilities as a single mother seriously, rather than expecting her to abandon everything for artistic opportunities. Their understanding of her priorities made their support feel genuine rather than merely sentimental. Jonathan Crawford joined the conversation with a business perspective that reflected his experience in investment planning. Elena, what we're discussing isn't charity. You clearly have marketable skills that have been underutilized. This is about matching talent with opportunity in a way that benefits everyone involved. Elena appreciated Jonathan's framing of the situation as a business proposition rather than a rescue mission, understanding that sustainable changes would need to make sense from multiple perspectives rather than relying solely on goodwill. The conversation continued for another hour as the group discussed various possibilities for Elena's future, from teaching positions to performance opportunities to educational programs that could help her complete her formal credentials. Elena found herself simultaneously excited and terrified as she contemplated changes she had never dared to imagine. As the evening drew to a close, Professor Chen approached Elena with a proposal that would begin her transition back to music immediately. Elena, the Chicago Symphony is performing Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 4 next month, and they're looking for a soloist for their community outreach concert. Would you be interested in auditioning? Elena felt her heart stop as she processed Professor Chen's suggestion. Performing with the Chicago Symphony would represent a return to the level of music making she had dreamed about for 25 years, but it would also expose her to professional scrutiny and public attention that might have unpredictable consequences. Professor Chen, I appreciate the suggestion, but I haven't performed publicly in decades. Elena said, her voice showing both longing and apprehension. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of exposure. Victoria Ashworth joined the conversation with the gentle persistence that had made her effective in philanthropic work. Elena, sometimes the best way to overcome fear is to take action before doubt can paralyze us. You've already proven tonight that your abilities are intact. The question is whether you're willing to trust yourself. Elena looked around the conference room at the faces of people who had become unexpected advocates for her future. She thought about Sophia, probably finishing her evening routine at home, and wondered what her daughter would think about the dramatic changes being proposed for their family. I need to discuss all of this with my daughter, Elena said finally. Sophia's opinion matters more than anything else in my decisions about our future. Professor Chen nodded approvingly at Elena's response, his expression showing respect for her priorities as a parent. Elena, that's exactly what I would expect from someone with your character. Take the time you need to make the right decisions for your family.
As the guests began to leave the Aurora Conference Center, several approached Elena with business cards and expressions of genuine interest in helping her navigate the transition back to music. She found herself with contact information for music directors, philanthropists, and business leaders who had gone from viewing her as invisible service staff to seeing her as a person with extraordinary potential. Richard Blackwood was among the last to leave, approaching Elena with obvious discomfort but apparent sincerity. "Elena, I want you to know that what happened tonight has been a learning experience for me. I plan to make changes in how I interact with all employees, and I hope you'll give me the opportunity to do better in the future." Elena accepted Blackwood's apology with the grace that had characterized her behavior throughout the evening, though she remained cautious about his motivations and follow-through. She understood that real change would be demonstrated through actions rather than words. As Elena finally began her delayed cleaning duties in the empty conference center, she found herself alone with the Steinway piano that had been her secret sanctuary for 4 years. The instrument looked the same as always, but Elena's relationship with it had been fundamentally altered by the evening's events. Elena sat down at the piano bench and played softly, processing the emotional upheaval of the night through music that expressed what words could not capture. She felt simultaneously liberated and terrified, grateful and apprehensive, hopeful and concerned about the uncertainties ahead. When Elena finally arrived home at 3 in the morning, she found Sophia waiting up despite the late hour. Her daughter's expression showed concern mixed with curiosity, suggesting that she had sensed something significant had happened during Elena's shift. "Mom, you look different," Sophia said, studying Elena's face with the perceptiveness that had always characterized their relationship. "Did something happen at work?" Elena sat down beside her daughter, knowing that she could no longer maintain the careful separation between her hidden musical identity and her role as Sophia's mother. The evening's events had made secrecy impossible and perhaps unnecessary. "Sophia, there are things about my past that I've never told you." Elena began, "Things I thought were better left buried. But tonight everything changed, and I think it's time you knew the whole truth about who your mother used to be." As Elena began to tell Sophia about her musical education, her abandoned dreams, and the choices she had made to provide stability for their family, she watched her daughter's expression shift from surprise to amazement to something approaching pride. Sophia listened without interruption as Elena described the evening's events, from Blackwood's cruel intentions to the unexpected support from his guests, to the possibilities now being discussed for Elena's future. When Elena finished her story, Sophia was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what she had learned. "Mom," Sophia said finally, "I'm proud of you for sacrificing your dreams for our family, but I'm even prouder that you never let those dreams completely die. Maybe it's time for both of us to be brave enough to pursue what we really want." Elena felt tears of gratitude and relief as she realized that Sophia not only understood her past choices, but supported her future possibilities. The conversation they had both avoided for years had finally taken place, and it had brought them closer together, rather than creating the problems Elena had feared. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself navigating a completely transformed life as the opportunities discussed that night began to materialize into concrete offers and possibilities. The audition with the Chicago Symphony led to a successful performance that received standing ovations and excellent reviews. The teaching position at the Chicago Institute of Music became a reality, with arrangements made for Elena to complete her degree through a special program for working professionals. Most importantly, Sophia's response to these changes had been overwhelmingly positive. Rather than feeling threatened by her mother's return to music, Sophia had embraced the opportunity to learn about Elena's artistic identity and had even begun exploring her own creative interests in biochemistry and music. As Elena prepared for her new life as a professional musician and educator, she reflected on the unlikely chain of events that had led from humiliation to transformation. Richard Blackwood's cruel joke had inadvertently created the circumstances for Elena to reclaim her authentic identity and build a future that honored both her artistic gifts and her responsibilities as a mother. The Aurora Conference Center's Steinway piano, once her secret sanctuary, had become the instrument of her liberation and the bridge between her hidden past and her promising future. Elena's story had become an inspiration to others facing similar circumstances, proving that it's never too late to pursue authentic dreams when the right support and opportunities finally align. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.